What is going on, everybody? This is Toby here, and welcome to my YouTube channel. I do movies in Blender GreasePencil, and also I'm a concept artist and visual development artist. And today I wanted to talk about something that I heard a couple of people mention lately. They were interested in getting started with making films in Blender and Blender GreasePencil. But they didn't really know anything about 3D software, right? They knew how to do Photoshop, how to animate in 2D maybe, but it can be very daunting, right? If you open up a 3D software, you have all those giant amount of information on the screen and you don't know really what to do with it. And maybe you also don't need all of it, right? So I thought, why not do a video where I explain, go through a little bit what is the essence of 3D software, right? Like what are the basics? How does it work behind the scenes? And they're helping you hopefully get started and making your own stuff while not like overwhelming you with all these extra things and extra settings that maybe you don't need to know. So with that said, let's roll the intro and jump into the video. Hope you have fun, guys. So you opened up Blender, maybe for the first time, maybe you already know the software a little bit, but in general, this is what you're getting greeted with. So we have a couple of options here to generate our files. We're gonna use the general option. This is the most well-rounded, all-around thing. There's a couple more specific ones, but this will do for now. Also, you have a list with recent files if you have already worked with it. So let's get started. Click on General. And we're in the software. Maybe as a disclaimer in front, if I'm talking about shortcuts, especially about shortcuts to navigate the viewport, I am using what is called industry-compatible shortcuts. I learned 3D softwares with Maya and with 3D Studio Max. And when you download and install Blender, it's asking you what kind of keyboard layout you're used to. And I chose the industry compatible one, which basically makes the viewport navigation like it is in Maya. If you want to use the standard Blender one, which makes it easier to Google if you're looking for something, then I will put a link in the description. What is the keyboard shortcuts for the normal way? All right, so what do we see here? This is our world, right? This is just a big empty space with a grid on the bottom, so we don't lose orientation in the vast emptiness. And it always comes with three basic objects in here, which is this one here, a cube. Then we have up here, it is a light source. This is a point light. And we have a camera over here. I'm just selecting the objects by clicking on them, as you would expect. Now, how do we get ourselves around in this big world? So there's just a few very simple options. There's three ways to manipulate the camera. And you hold down the Alt button and the left click in order to rotate yourself by clicking and dragging around an object, around a point, right? So this is the first mode. Second one is if you hold down Alt and the middle mouse button, you're gonna pan your viewport left to right, up or down, right? Moving it sideways. And the third option is holding down Alt and right click will zoom your viewport in and out by shoving your mouse up and down. What I mostly do is I just use the mouse wheel, scrolling up and down, also does the same thing, and it's more convenient in my opinion. And you can also, right, click an object, you have the cube down here. And if you are lost, right, you're somewhere up here and you're rotating around a point that is not where you want to look at, you want to look over here. So you have the cube selected and then you press the F key, F for focus, and it's gonna zoom in and focus on one object, and this is your new highlight point of interest that you're gonna rotate around. You see the camera is now spinning around the cube. Similar thing I can do up here with the camera, right? If I want to manipulate this, zoom in on that, select it by left clicking, pressing F to zoom in. And now this is my point of interest. All right, this should get you around the scene. Now let's talk a little bit about what do we see on screen here, right? Like all 3D softwares, there's a lot of different things, a lot of different information that is going on. But right now you don't really need all of them. Just a couple of basic things that you're gonna need. So first of all, as we said, this is our viewport where we see everything. And to the left of it, there's this little bar here with a couple of symbols. What those do is there are basic tools to manipulate objects in the world on a very basic level. And the basic level in each 3D software that you use are always move, rotate, and scale, right? So if I click on the cube here, right now the select tool is chosen as a default. I can just click on things, right? Not do anything with it. And let's choose the move tool. Let's click here or use the shortcut W to just go here. You can still select it with those tools. But now you also have these arrows here, right? And what those arrows allow us to do is move the objects around, right? For example, this green arrow here will move the objects along the green axis, the y-axis. You see this coordinate system in the world, and clicking this and dragging it will just move the object around this axis. And just this axis, right? I can move my mouse up and down, will just be down here. Control Z is undo, as always. And the same goes for this, right? The green one moves it here, and the Z one moves it up and down. Then we have those little squares that are in between all the arrows. And as you probably already expected, if you choose these to click and drag the object, it will lock the movement just to those two axes, right? So it just moves up and down, left and right, but not along the green axis towards us and backwards. Same goes here. If I choose this one, it will just use those two axes. And the final option is if you click and choose this circle here in the middle, it will just freeform move the objects, which means just relative to your camera, it will move the cube around, right? Now I'm looking a little bit from the top and I click and drag it, move it up here. And since I looked from the top, you see it moved into this direction here. Undo it. And this is the basics of the movement tool. Pretty easy, I would say. Second one is the rotate tool. And those all follow the same rules, right? You have your axes that rotates it along this one. This rotates the y-axis and the z-axis. And if you click in between them, it just freeform rotates however you please. And a similar thing goes for the scale tool. You can scale it up and down, like this and like this. Or if you click the big circle here, you can just choose the big one here. You can scale the whole thing in all dimensions up and down. All right, now what else do we have? We have up here our normal file edit render windows. This is used for, you know it from old software, saving, opening new files, what have you. To the right of this, you will find a bar that says layout, modeling, sculpting, whatever. And those are your basic viewport settings, right? You can modify your viewport if you have a specific task that you want to do in this program. In 99% of the cases, you can just ignore this for now, right? We just stay in the layout tab for now. There's a couple of very interesting things in shading and in compositing, but for now, let's stay here. We have all that we need. Underneath this are the options that are specific for this viewport that we're in right now, right? So we have these options here where we can change the viewport to something else. We can also ignore this for now. We have the different modes of the objects. We're also going to get to that later. And also there's a couple of view options where we can change the viewport, for example, down here at the viewport tab. If you want to, for example, look at your scene from the top, you click from the top, or you want to see it from the front, right? And you get these nice orthogonal views where perspective is not put into consideration, and it's nice for constructing things. You also have select options. Well, those are a bit self-explanatory, but very important. You have this one here. This is add. And as you would expect, this is how you create things in this space, right? And there's a bunch of different things that you're going to create. And we'll get to this later. Just remember it for now. Also, when you're in an orthogonal viewport, you can just hold Alt and click and drag, and it puts you back into perspective mode automatically. And then here's some more advanced options for objects, right? We find the basic transform tools that we had over here. We can mirror the objects and we can duplicate it. So a bit more advanced stuff than just this one here. And this is also important for later operations. So what else do we see? So we have up here in the middle a couple of things relating to those arrow systems that we just talked about, right? So when I showed you, for example, that you can move it along these axes, there's some other ways that you can manipulate it. Let me show you. So let's say we rotated this cube like this and like this. If I go back to the move tool, the arrows will still point in the directions of the world, right? X, Y, Z. But sometimes, let's say I want to move the cube in the direction that is, let's say, from the perspective of the cube, right? I want it to move there now. So what I can do is change this coordinate system, right? This kind of little arrows that we have here. And we do that by changing the transform orientation from global to local. This can be done up here. Put it to local. And now you see the arrows snapped in the way that makes sense for the cube. If we rotate it, you see the arrows are following the cube, right? We can just move it somewhere, and now they look like this. Can be very handy for manipulating objects in a certain way that you want them to. The rest we're also going to ignore for now. Then on the top right here, you have a couple of different settings relating to how stuff is displayed in the viewport, right? There's some options that are not super important for now. This little button here and this one will be important later when we go into GreasePencil. And here are different options to display it. And this is all stuff that will be present in every 3D software that you ever open up. Just clicking through the different options, we have what is called a wireframe layout, where you just see the outlines of the box. Everything is transparent, so you can see what's behind it. This is just a basic flat shaded version. This is flat shaded with basic light. And this is fully rendered, basically. So you see all the effects and stuff, but also let's not dive too deep into it. So then, what else do we have? We have up here the scene collection, or the view layer display, right? In Maya, it's called an outliner, but what it is, it's basically, I would say it's a bit similar to your layer stack in Photoshop, right? You have a list of all the objects that are contained in the scene. Right now, you see there's a cube, there's a camera, and there's a light. And if I click on those objects here, they're highlighted in this view here. Select the light is selected, select the cube. And also this goes the other way, right? I can click here and select the objects that I want to have. If you have a very big scene with objects scattered all about, it can be very handy to just find the name. And then, for example, if I'm over here, I want to select the cube and then press the F key to zoom in on it, and I've found it immediately. This is why it's also important to name your objects. I know we all do it in Photoshop, have 1,000 different layers that have all no names except for layer 25, layer 26, what have you. But please go ahead and take this little time. Say like, this is Toby's cube, for example, right? And now if I have a million different cubes in here, I still know how to find it. I can also search for it up here, right? And by default, all these objects are put into what is called a collection. Collection is the same as a group in Photoshop, right? So just a way to organize objects. And I can put a new group by clicking New Collection up here. This puts a collection. The old one was still selected, so it created it inside of it, but I can just click and drag it out. And for example, I take Toby's cube, put it in the new collection, and call it Toby's collection. Press enter, and there we go. And like in Photoshop, you can click this little eye to show or hide any given object. And now we have down here this whole shebang, and this is a lot of stuff that we're not gonna go into very deeply. I would just say, maybe to summarize it, this is ways to manipulate the rules of your world and the rules of your objects, right? The complex thing, but also the interesting thing about any 3D software is that there's no rules to this universe, right? There's no like physics that are applied automatically. You have to decide everything by yourself, like what should be the rules that your world works in, how light behaves, how whatever behaves. And you can do this all, or almost all, in these ones here. There's a couple of different things that will be interesting for us, but for now, we'll leave it be. We're gonna return here if we go into GreasePencil a little bit later and talk about it more, right? For example, right here, we're in the object properties, and you see if we're moving the cube around like we did before, we see the numeric values here change, right? So this is where you can track it and also set it if you want to set it to a very specific point, or rotate it in a very different, in a very specific degree, scaling it. This is all possible here. And you have options in order to define your image output, define the resolution of your screen, what have you. Everything is here. Okay, the last thing that I want to talk about is this window down here. Right now it's very small because I dragged it this way. If you want to resize windows, you can just take this bar here and just move it up. Just click in between on the little black thing, move it up. This is our timeline. So of course it's about animation. So the timeline is your movie length, right? Each tick here is one frame. Starts with frame 0 by default, and you can put the frame number that you want to view here. And this is the start and the end of your clip. Right now, this scene is 250 frames long, so around about 10 seconds, or exactly 10 seconds if we're on 25 frames per a second. And you can put keyframes here and just click play or stop. Also, you can hit the spacebar key to auto play and stop. Alrighty, then let's get on to the second part, which will be talking a little bit about how to create objects and also how to manipulate objects in a very basic way. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna just select all just by clicking and dragging the frame. You can also select all up here, and we're gonna press the delete key. This will delete everything. You see that the collections are still there. They don't auto-delete. So Toby's collection, we don't need it right now, just also delete it. So now we have just this empty world with this grid on the bottom. Now we want to create an object. How do we gonna do that? We're gonna go up here and say add. And we have a couple of different things, or basically everything that is possible to create we find here. Let's just start with creating a mesh to talk a little bit about how 3D works in general. We're gonna choose the monkey head. It's called Suzanne. It comes with Blender by default. It's just a kind of nice little tryout object. And you see it's very boxy, hard edges, that it's because it's made from polygons, right? 3D always consists of polygons, which are dots in space that are connected by a flat surface, and that forms the 3D object. Okay, now we have Suzanne here, see her, and we want to manipulate her, right? What we're going to do is go up here into this line. Right now it is set on object mode, which means the whole selection moving thing that we did before works for objects, right? Those things that we create, those are objects. We can also choose down here, if we click, we can choose the edit mode down here. What this means is that we go into the sub-object mode, and now all those tools that we discussed before, they're not working for the whole object, but for parts of the object. And as I just talked about how it's set up, we have 3 different things that we can select. We can select a vertex. Vertex are these dots here that are the cornerstones of this 3D object, right? Those are the points in space where the polygons, which is this square here, meets. And we can do the same as before, just move it around and we see the object deform, right? Undo, we can, obviously we could also rotate and scale it, but since this is just an infinitely small point in space, it doesn't do anything. The next thing is the edge mode. This is this one over here. And what this lets us do is select those edges, as the name implies. So just the connection between 2 points, right? If we just want to select this one, we can also hold shift click like in any other software and select multiple and move this up and down. This moves this whole ridge here. And the third mode is the polygon mode, face select, right? And this lets us select a face. Actually, the correct way of saying it is this is a face, this is a square. The polygon is like a triangle. This is like separated into triangles always, but this is more theory. And this lets us select multiple faces, move this around, and this lets us do all kinds of cool stuff with it. There's a lot of different options what you can do with those faces, with those modes that you have. I'm just going to talk about a couple of very basic things. If you want to build a very simple 3D geometry for your, let's say you want to build a set or a dummy character or so, this is a very easy way to do it, right? So if we're in face mode and we have a face selected, we can do a thing that is called extruding the face, which just means it is here in face. And actually the first option right here, extrude face, we can click it. Alternatively, you can select Ctrl E. And what this does is basically taking the face and pulling it out, creating some new geometry underneath it, right? It's just building a tower on top of it. Let's just do it again, Ctrl E. And we have this little plus here. We click it and drag it. And now when we have clicked Ctrl E, we can do it again. Ctrl E. That's the next thing. Sometimes you have to deselect and select it again. There we go. You also see those tools here highlighted in the sidebar. This is kind of the advanced editing things. And of course, you can always go back to the other modes in between. For example, edge select. Let's choose the move tool again and sculpt this a little bit, right? Move those a little bit down here, down there, and there you go. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with this. And with that and a couple of other very basic features here, you can, for example, bevel the edges. That means it splits up the edge into 2 separate ones, like, oh, it doesn't cooperate, like this. Cool. So you can smooth stuff around, manipulate things, and I would just advise you, just feel free and try it out. Just like take a cube, take an object, and just try to build something. Like learning by doing is always the best way of doing it. At least that's how I work best and learn best and remember it best in the end. Quick note towards the shortcuts. If you want to quickly switch between those 3 modes, vertex, edge, and face, you can also press the 1, 2, and 3 keys, right? Mode 3 is face, mode 2 is vertex, and mode 2 is edge, sorry, and mode 1 is vertex. And you see, if I have, for example, mode 3 a face selected, and I switch modes, it will also select automatically the corresponding edges, right? With this face, if I press 1, I have those 4 vertices on the corner. All right, let's get going then. So now let's delete this abomination and just create a new blank monkey now that we know that it's done. So the second thing that we can create, and we probably should create, is a camera. So why do we want to do that? Don't we have a camera? I mean, we're looking around the scene. We're sort of our own camera, right? But the thing is, you want a perspective that is fixed, right? Like a fixed viewpoint that you can always return to, that you have defined. This is part of the layouting process to define your shot. And I just click Add Camera and just created one here. But let me go over some basics first. So you see that the camera is kind of wonky, right? It's just looking at a weird angle here, and maybe you want to have something more concrete. Whenever you create a camera, it uses the view that you're currently in as a guideline. So I was looking like this, and it created the camera to match this view. If you want to make one that is more tidy, let's say, let's just go to Viewport and put the whole scene to the front, right? We view from the front. And if we now click and add a camera to the scene and Alt click and drag out of it again, you see that this camera has been created looking perfectly from the front, which is a nicer starting point instead of just having one free floating in space. So now how do we look out of this camera? I mean, we want to see what I did there, right? We can do this by choosing View up here. And again, Viewport, you can have this camera and select it, whoop, and now we're in the view of the camera. And like with any other viewport, alt-clicking out of it will just get you out of the camera back into your normal work perspective. But now we have the issue that we want to define a camera. We want to see how our image looks like, but we cannot really move the camera. We're stuck inside of it, right? So this is where we will split our viewport into two parts. And the way we can do that is we can select View and we click Areas here. And there's some split options here, right? And what I do mostly is I just take the option Vertical Split, which gives me this line here. Just click it however I want and I click, whoop. And now I have two viewports. I can choose one of these viewports, click and drag, and now I'm in my perspective view again, right? Now I see my camera with my coordinate system and my Suzanne hat. And now I can move the camera and you see this one is changing accordingly. Can push it forward and backward, put it up here, rotate it around a little bit, and there you go. Very quick and easy. Also, you notice that this camera is sort of like, there's this frame around it, right? It's cropped. That's because as soon as we start putting a camera in the scene, the program wants to tell you, okay, this is what the image will look if we render it, right? Because renderings always have a certain solution. It's a document width and height like in Photoshop. The way we manipulate this is, first of all, we can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out, right? If this frame is too small, you want to see more of it, you can just like zoom in as with any other viewport and it covers more of the screen. The way to manipulate how much we see here, or the aspect ratio, is by using this tab here, right? This is the first time we're gonna use one of those tabs, and we choose output properties here. And this is where we define how the output of our film will look like, right? Right now it's just set to HD as a standard, 1920 and 180. For example, if we want to do a CinemaScope shot, we can put this to 2390 and put 1000 here. And now we have a CinemaScope screen, right? It's like a nice widescreen like you have in cinema. And also you can put other stuff here. You can select the frame rate. For example, earlier I talked about being 10 seconds with 25 FPS. By default, Blender is always set to 24. My big advice is whenever you start anything and you want to animate it, choose your frame rate at the beginning. I ran into a lot of cases over the years where I failed to define it in the beginning if I wanted to be 24 or 25 FPS, and it made huge problems because other softwares maybe operate with a different frame rate, and then you have the problem that the length of your clips doesn't match up anymore. So let's choose 25 FPS because then our timeline down here is a smooth 10 seconds. All right, the second thing that we want to manipulate, or that we can manipulate that we want to, is the camera options. So whenever you have an object that is something more than just basic geometry, you have custom options down here, right? Object data properties. This is where we put the settings for our camera. This is also where we're gonna find our grease pencil options later on when we create grease pencil objects. So default camera is set to 50 millimeters. And if we want it to be a bit of a more fisheye perspective, we can, for example, put it to 25 millimeters. And now you see it got smaller because the angle of the view got wider. And if we push the camera in, you see that we're in way more of a fisheye view, right? It's just like popping out of the screen more. Let's put it very extreme, put it to 5. And now you see when I'm going in, this distorts the image like crazy. Okay, so if you want to make your image very flat, like if you want to show something that's far away, for example, you can just put 90 millimeters, and this will make the lens very long. You see it in this cone there with the camera, and this will just push objects closer together visually. All right, clip start and clip end. Sometimes you can run into these weird problems where objects start disappearing in the back of your scene when you're too far away from them. And this is because of the clip distance, right? If, for example, I put 1 here, everything is gone. And don't panic. It's just because the camera only, in this case, renders stuff that is from 0.1 till 1 meter away from this source point. So if I click and drag and push this up, you see the grid appearing here on the floor. And at some point, there is Suzanne again, right? And if you have this problem, you can just put 10,000 or something, and then you never have a problem. Again, this is mostly if you have big complex scenes and you want to reduce the load on your poor computer. All right, so now we have a camera, we have an object in the scene, and we understand how the basics of the polygonal editing works and how the logic of 3D spaces work, right? What we talked about. Let's put this back actually to maybe 45. It's a bit more convenient. And now let's get into the meat of things. Cool. So you want to start doing some grease pencil stuff, right? Let's get this Suzanne out of here. Thank you, Suzanne. So let's do this. Let's go to add grease pencil and let's add a stroke, which is mostly what I choose. You can use a blank object. This has nothing in it at all, but then you have the problem, you don't know where your grease pencil object is. So let's do the stroke. It's this one right here. And what this does, it has this default stroke in there, which is good because then you can decide, okay, I want this grease pencil object to rest here or here or here, whatever. You can also rotate it. And the thing is with grease pencil, it works, so the basics of it work in the same way like all the other objects that we talked about, right? It's still an object up here. It's just called stroke in the outliner. It is a empty object and that just contains what is called a curve, right? A curve is just a line in the 3D space, but it consists of the same things as the 3D objects. For example, if I go to edit mode up here and I go to vertex, you see that it consists of all those little dots, just like the 3D objects. This is the way this works, right? You can also go to edge. This is when you have multiple strokes, so you can select an edge. This is just one continuous one. This is why it selects the whole thing. But this is how it is displayed. And the way this stroke is rendered is that the software puts little squares of polygons around these lines and fills it with a texture, right? In this case, it's just a flat black texture, but this is the way it works behind the scenes, sort of, right? So let's go back to object mode. We see it here from the camera. And if you create a grease pencil object, by default, you're going to get thrown into the object data properties here again, right? This is where the sub-properties of anything like the camera will be located. And here we have all the options for your grease pencil, which is, if you're familiar with Photoshop, now we're getting into very familiar territory, right? We have a stack of layers. We have blend modes like hard light, add, subtract, multiply. We have masks that we can apply. We have opacity and stuff, right? Can change the opacity up and down. And a couple of additional things as well. So let's go through it one by one, right? We have line and color. Those are the two basic things that will be created in any given grease pencil objects. Well, if you use this stroke example, the line contains this thing. The color is by default empty. We have the blend modes. This doesn't do a lot if there's no other stuff to interact with. It's similar if you have a layer in Photoshop, you put it on screen or something and there's nothing underneath it, you will not see anything. And use light will be relevant if we want to put a light source that illuminates this scene or this grease pencil stuff. Mask is the same as a mask in Photoshop, right? Or like an opacity, where you can define, okay, this should only be visible in certain points. This whole stuff is not very relevant. And this is onion skinning, which will be interesting for animation purposes, where you can see the frame before the one that you're currently working on and the one behind it. And all the rest we can also ignore for now. The other important thing is this one down here. If you go to the material properties, you will get your grease pencil material. And this is how the stroke will look like, right? By default, you have black, white, red, green, blue, and gray. Gray is going to be a solid color. And by default, the black color is applied to the stroke. You have two different options. In any grease pencil material, you can use the stroke option, right? This just traces the line that you're making. And you can manipulate the base color with this little convenient wheel here. If we push this up towards a bit white, it gets brighter. If we, for example, put it blue or cyan, then it's going to look like this. And those ones are the same. They all work after the same principle. My normal thing is I just like delete them all because don't really need them. And now we can just paint something in here, right? So how do we do that? We have the grease pencil object selected. And for now, we're just going to kick out those two layers and create a new layer that we call test draw. All right. And then we'll just enlarge this window here a bit. And here, up here where we went to the edit mode earlier, when we have a grease pencil object like the stroke selected, we can choose the mode draw that is down here. And now the tools on the left have changed a bit, right? We have stuff that we know from Photoshop, from 2D software. We have a pen, a fill tool, eraser, and so forth. And now you can start making a stroke. Just making one, see, there. We can just paint, just doing it with a pen. This stroke is very transparent. That's because of the brush settings. Again, familiar from other 2D softwares, and the brush settings you find up here. This comes with a couple of standard brushes, and I mostly use these so far. I think you can do more elaborate ones as well, but I might cover that in the future. Right now, standard is the pen selected, which is something that reacts to opacity. For now, let's use the ink pen, which will create a more sturdy line. similar to an ink blot. And of course, we can choose a radius. For example, if I choose 200, it will make a huge fat line. If I put 30, it will be very thin. And also here you can switch on and off the pressure for your pen. So if you turn that off, it always maintains the same radius. If you switch it on, it will react on pressure and change the thickness of your stroke. Strength controls the opacity. Right now it is set on 1, so it's always 100% opaque. I can also switch on same thing here, and this way I can control the opacity with my pen pressure. Now, where are those strokes created? Those strokes are created on the world origin, more or less, looking towards the camera. Or let's say they're created where the grease pencil object is. And we might come to that later if we try to move the camera around a bit and draw a new frame. Because there's also several ways how you can control where in the 3D space the stroke is created, right? This is the cool thing about Grease Pencil. It's a tool where you can draw in a real 3D space, but of course there has to be some information of where, in which distance from the camera your stroke is created and what it is facing. But let's leave this to one side for now and go over some other tools. So we have the bucket fill, where we can, if we make a line that is just enclosed, we can then choose the bucket and fill the inside of this, right? So I can make a new layer, calling it fill, and I can move this down here. So by the way, those tools here are adding a new layer, deleting a layer, and here I can change the order with the arrows up and down. And here are some additional options, like duplicating it, or for example, merging it down. If you have a big stack and you want to simplify some stuff, it's very easy to do that. And then we're doing it in a normal black material. If I create a new material down here by also clicking the plus and saying new, and making this a fill material with, for example, a purple hue, I can then just click and it will automatically fill the contours of these strokes. There's a bit more finesse to that I might get into in a more detailed video about the precise tools of Grease Pencil, where we can set the precision and the dilation. And yeah, there's a lot of fine tweaks that you can do, but this is basic stuff, right? Then we have the eraser tool. And remembered earlier when I said that Grease Pencil strokes are not strokes as you have it in Photoshop, which are pixels on a screen, right? But you actually have little curves here, right? Similar to the 3D object, I can take those curves and take a vertex and just like draw it out, and you see, looks very weird. And the eraser has a couple of different modes that it can work in. So by standard, I think it's set to dissolve. And when dissolve happens, it's deleting points when I do this, but it's also giving it kind of a smooth edge, right? And you see here what is the particularness of Grease Pencil, because this fill that is created here, these are polygons that are spanning in between the little points in the outside, and they're automatically generated, right? So when I delete the corner points, and the polygons sort of follow along with it. If I go to point mode, it deletes it hard. It shows it a little bit better. You see, as I move it down here, the points plop away sort of. So I cannot go just in the middle of this space and just start erasing, right? Nothing happens here because there's no points to delete. So I have to go around the edge, and there's really no big way around this. This is just some peculiarness of painting with vectors in a 3D space. And yeah, I hope at some point in the future they change this and give us an option to like retessellate this surface. But for now, this is what happens. And the last option here is stroke, where you can just delete your whole stroke, right? This deletes everything that is connected with each other, right? Here, I just deleted this huge stroke that I made earlier just with one click. And if you have a lot of little things that you want to get rid of, just one click dissolves them all, as opposed to point, where you just like delete all the points. This is all that you need to know for now. There's a couple of options down here to make straight lines, for example, but you can also do this by, or like in my opinion, which is the better option. Let's just go back to the ink pen. By drawing, right? I'm still with the material, the fill material. Let's get back to the line, right? So this is your line. And if you want to make a straight line, but don't want it to have this kind of machine-made look, you can hold down the Shift key while drawing. And what this does is this happens here. And you see how this little trail comes out from behind my cursor. I'm not drawing directly, I'm kind of dragging a line behind me. And if you want to make a very nice and smooth line, let me just, for example, draw a circle. And you see, I have not the steadiest hand in the world. It's a little bit janky, right? There's like these little things that go out and in. And if I hold the Shift key, even if I'm jittering around a little bit, my hand drank a lot of coffee this morning, you get a much more nice shape. And similar, if you make straight lines, it's way easier to have a straight line, but still give it this kind of handmade feel, right? So these are the basics. Another thing that you can do, which is one of the big benefits of this being vector-based, is you don't just have the draw mode. You have, as I showed earlier, also the edit mode, right? So you can, if you want, just take those vertices and move them around. But you can also take entire strokes, right? You can select them like you would select any object and just move them. Sometimes you just have an object that's relatively static and you may want to make a new keyframe for it. And you can just move it to the side, make a new keyframe, and there you go. But where the cool stuff happens is down here in the sculpt mode. So sculpt mode means that you can basically sculpt your drawing as if it was clay, right? So this is the standard that is selected. It's push, and you really don't need the other tools for now. Let's put the radius to 100, make it a bit bigger. And now you see I can shove my drawing around, right? If you want to animate some slight deformations or so, or just like tweak your drawing a bit, it's a very cool tool. Obviously, you can adjust the strength. If you put the radius giant, you can just like move whole parts of your image around with like deforming it a little bit. And what you can also do is, let me just go to this line up here, which I drew freehand. And you see, if you zoom in very closely, there's this little jankiness in there, right? The one that I just tried to get rid of while using this kind of Shift key drag behind mode. You can as well hold Shift in the sculpt mode and go over this. And now the program is trying to smooth out your strokes. This is not working very well right now because the resolution is very small from these. There's not enough vertices to really make it work. But let me just try to put down the size a bit. And you can get over, and you see how this little bend here goes in and the software is trying to smooth out your lines, right? So you can go over some drawing that's a little bit jagged, and you can really just polish it up, basically, right? Just go over it very slightly, Bob Ross style, polishing it up. And by the way, in the sculpt mode, you always have those lines here, right? That's indicating the actual path that is generating the line. And if you don't want to see that, if it's like, oh, this is information you're not interested in, remember that we said that we're going to use this little thing up here. So this is basically the viewport display where you tell the viewport what kind of additional information that you want to see. You just switch that off, just switches it off. It switches off everything though, right? So you notice that also the grid that defines the world space is gone. And those are all things that you can switch on and off here at will, basically. The grid on the floor, that is just called the floor. You can switch that on and off. and 3D cursor is the thing here in the middle. So all very elaborate ways of doing it. I think, if I remember correctly, this is extras. No. Ah, well, one of those is the lines as well. Ah, yeah, edit lines down here. You see, yeah, I'm not a perfect expert in it as well, but I'm hoping I can still tell you some interesting stuff. So the edit lines are this, and you see we still have the floor in here, but we don't have those pesky lines if you don't want to see them, or just switch it off and you have your pure drawing, and you can still do all your little editing work in here. And now here's the thing. When we create those grease pencil strokes, they're not just created in a certain location in space, as we see here, but they're also created in a certain location in time. So what does that mean? Let me show you. I'm just going to pull up this tab down here, which is the timeline, right? This is the timeline sheet. This is by default active, and we're on frame 1 right now. And you see there's nothing in there. There's no keyframe, no anything. Nothing moves, nothing happens. The only thing that happens if I go to negative, it disappears. So why is that? So first of all, we want to see our grease pencil stuff. What we need to do is use the dope sheet. That's what grease pencil uses to put its keyframes. So let's go here to this little icon on the corner, and instead of timeline, we select dope sheet. And it's still nothing there. That's why we have to put here grease pencil as well. And now you see this one here. Actually, this is flipped close. There's a keyframe here now. Frame 1, there's a keyframe. And you see that is the name of our object, so it's called stroke. And if we flip it open, you see the name of our layers. It's fill and test draw. And you can switch those on and off down here as well, similar as you can do here. And each of those layers has one keyframe now on frame 1. And the way the keyframes work in this software is it only generates a stroke for everything that comes after it in time, right? So for example, if I take those and press W, which is also move for the timeline, move them to frame 6, for example, here's nothing, and then here, boom, everything appears. That's because here is the point where the program says, I generated something, and all the time after it's going to be visible. And each layer has a separate key. That means I can also take this one up here and drag it to frame 4. And now on frame 4, the stuff on top here appears. And on frame 6, everything appears. So this is the basics of how you manage frames in here and how you animate, basically. So let me do a quick demonstration. I'm just going to put a new layer up here. And what I will do, I will take those layers down here and I'm going to lock them, because it creates keyframes on all layers that are not locked. If I go up here and draw something and I will not lock the layer, it will create also keyframes in fill and test draw. And I don't want this. I just want my keyframe to go up here. So this is locked. I have the draw mode selected. And let me just go very quickly back to timeline, because when we want to do multiple frames, something is very important to activate, because otherwise it won't draw anything, is this one here, auto keying. It's basically, as the icon suggests, it's like pressing record, right? If you have this pressed, the program will record your actions, not in the way like everything you generate, but you will be able to create new keyframes only when this is active. So let me go to dope sheet again, and now we have GP layer, and I will switch off fill and test draw just so it's not visible, and I will draw a sphere, and now I will go to frame 6 and I will draw another sphere, and while I draw it, they're both visible, and if I let it go, the first one disappears, right? So we see here's one sphere, here's the other one. This is the point where it switches over. One more interesting thing to talk about before we wrap up is the onion skinning, I think, which is a very helpful feature for animating. So if you're used to normal 2D animation software, maybe, you know that there's this feature where you can mildly see the frame before and after it to help you plan out what you're going to do next, right? And the onion skinning is this little button over here that turns it on and off for any given layer. But doesn't do anything, right? I don't see the frame before it or after it. And also down here is the settings for the onion skinning, where you can put the opacity, frame before, frame after, even give it custom colors, but they don't show up. That's why we still have to activate it up here, right? This is still with the viewport settings. And if we go down here and activate the onion skinning, now you can see that it works, right? So if we go here, for example, you see the frame that comes after it. And if we go here, you see the frame that comes before it. And it's very convenient because if you go, for example, to the frame that is in the middle somewhere, 3, and you want to make a transitional pose, you just draw a circle here. And now both of them are before and after. And now you made it move in a smooth way. And you can just go through it and just do one tiny click here that creates an almost invisible dot. And you can do this. This is like super shoddy done, right? But this is the way that you in between stuff. It's very easy, very convenient, and goes quite quickly. Another thing that I wanted to touch on that I have mentioned but not really gone deeper in, but can be very helpful, is masks. So let's delete this for now. Let's make a new layer and saying base and on top. Cool. We're gonna go to the base here. Timeline doesn't really matter currently. And we will choose a solid material. Let's choose this gray, and we will create this heart shape, maybe, right? It has a stroke and a fill currently applied. This is something interesting to look at. So you can do both, right? You can do a stroke and directly fill it in. I mostly like to keep them separate in order that I have control over both. But let's do this. And so this is the base. And now on top here, we will draw, let's maybe draw a little star. So we choose yellow and we do whoop, 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 whoop. There's a little star. Now, this one is in the heart now currently. It doesn't help me really for what I want to demonstrate. So what I do is I lock this base layer and I will go into edit mode. Take this star, all the vertices, you can also just take the entire stroke, just move it a little bit outside, right? We're back with the move tools. We can also scale it up a bit, rotate it a bit, doesn't really matter. But what this does now is if we go on top here and we can activate mask. This activates it here with this little hook and you can tell it what should the star use to be masked? And we click a little plus and add base. And now you see that the star is only visible where the heart is. So it's the same as a mask in Photoshop, really. Go to edit mode, we shove it around, we see it disappears if it's outside, and it appears when it's inside. You can also change the layer mode to add lighting effects, to multiply, what have you. So that's it. That's basically how you animate. I just want to go over one very particular thing that I mentioned earlier with the spacing of the grease pencil object literally in the space, right? Like where it is placed. You see that it is changing positions a little bit just now from side to side as it should. But let me just go very quickly back to the timeline and we'll zoom out. And what we're gonna do is we will animate our camera. The way that you animate anything, it's very similar. Let's just switch this off because it's not that convenient. Instead, what you can use to animate, in the case of objects that are not grease pencil, you can select an object, go to a point in the timeline, and you can press the S key, which creates a keyframe here. And you see, you have always here the description, what you have keyframed. Here's the camera. And here it's like broken down into all the single bits, right? So I put a keyframe here. And here you see the circle switching at frame 6. So at frame 6, let's move the camera. Let's make this bigger so we see what we're doing. Let's just move this over here and over here and rotate this a bit, right? This can happen all the time. When you're filmmaking, you obviously want to have a moving camera and maybe view your objects from a different perspective. So like this, and press S again. And now it's keyframed. Now if you go back and forth, you see the camera moving from A to B. Whoop, whoop, like this. So let me go back to the dope sheet and to GreasePencil. So now we have this second keyframe here. Let me just delete this actually. And what we'll do, I forgot to turn back on the recording. There we go. Now what we'll do is do the same thing as before again, right? We just draw and we do a second circle. That's a bit more to the top here. Right, so this worked like a charm. But now you see depends what you would call it, an issue. It can be an issue depending on the situation that you're in, but it's definitely something to watch out for, right? This was facing the camera in the beginning, as you see here. And now when I draw the second frame, this is also facing the camera. A lot of times this is exactly what you want to happen, right? But when it comes to the depth layer, sometimes it's not what you want to happen. Sometimes you want it to stay on a flat plane. So let me elaborate the point, and I need to make some setup for this. Let's switch this off, make a new layer, and shove it all the way down. It's something I do a lot when drawing, and I call this layer canvas. Sometimes you have a lot of background stuff going on and you cannot really concentrate on your drawing. So what we can do is, let's just use this fill material because we have it lying around, and we choose a nice, let's do like a middle brown or so. And what you can do is do this, right? You just make a nice big canvas for yourself. You just draw a square. This is from the camera. And there we go. We lock it. And now we see when the camera goes around, the canvas stays where it is. Let's just turn the opacity down a bit. There, very nice. So this is a nice base, right? If we have an object behind it, for example, if there's Suzanne and the Suzanne is somewhere here and we want to draw something on top of it. Now we have this canvas. Now it's without the canvas, now it's with the canvas, and we can just like have a layer that's overlaying the scene and gives us a nice backdrop to paint on. Very convenient in my opinion. And now let's switch on this layer again, right? So you notice that here the circle is on this canvas and now it's not, it's behind it somehow. It's shoved its way through it. And what if we wanted to stay on the canvas? Now what we can do is we'll delete this keyframe again and go to the draw mode. And remember those coordinate systems that we talked about before. If we want the objects to follow their local logic instead of the global logic, there's a couple of things that you can set up here. It's set up to origin by default. What we can do is link it to stroke. And now we're just gonna draw on the stroke that is already existing. So let's do this. I still have the wrong material selected. Sorry, my bad. Let's go back to the black material. And we draw it here. And you see that this circle was created on this canvas now, right? So we have the same result, basically, optically, but the stroke stays where it's supposed to stay. And it's a very nice and convenient way to control your location in space. And this is roundabout it. With these basics, you should be able to work in GreasePencil in a very nice manner. I hope the demonstration was not too dry. And oh yeah, of course, one thing, if you want to output your video, it's very simple. The easiest way is go to output properties. And here you can just output it, right? Choose a file path, choose a format that you want to output the video in, and then you can just render animation, and it will render it from your camera that you have active in your scene. Sweet. I can just encourage you, play around with it. It's a great deal of fun. I had tons of fun with it, and it's a very cool and flexible system. I would always recommend you, if you're working in it, build a rough set of what you want to do in 3D with some simple boxes, right? You can put cubes and like shove them around to build some, basically everything very simple, like in Minecraft world, more or less. And then really think about your camera and the movements that your camera wants to do, and then start drawing and free doodling in it. And that's the beauty of GreasePencil. It's a very free and open system that can yield great results if you put some time in it. All right, and there we have it. I hope this was very informative for you, and maybe you get a better grasp, a better understanding now of what is going on when you're having Blender open, and maybe now you can play around with it, try out some stuff, right? I obviously skipped over a whole bunch of things, and I really hope that I didn't get any of the informations wrong that I told there. I'm not like the biggest Blender pro in the world there, but yeah, still maybe you can find something helpful in there, and getting to work, making your own things. So when you want to see more of my stuff, please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I also have an Instagram that I post regularly on. And yeah, let me know in the comments how you like this, if you missed any information, like if there's something more that you would be interested in. That's also always super interesting for me, right? So I get to know like what you guys want to hear about, what you would like me to talk about. And then I will also hopefully post soon a bit more short films, maybe a bit more making ofs of this. So yeah, lots more exciting stuff to come. Stay tuned and have a very nice day, and see you very soon. Goodbye.